Hey, it's Ollie, and in this video I'm going to talk about one very simple tweak you can make to your language learning routine that can have a pretty massive impact on the results that you get on a daily basis. First of all though, I'm really glad you guys have been enjoying these videos. I quite enjoy making them. They're obviously quite kind of off the cuff. I think that's kind of good because a lot of my blog articles tend to be more in depth. My podcast episodes on the I Will Teach You a Language podcast tend to be longer, maybe a bit more prepared. I do prepare them more than these videos, so this kind of gives me a chance to kind of to talk. And what you get from this is my not necessarily well thought through opinions, but at the very least you get kind of what goes on in my head when I think about these kind of topics. Also, thanks to whoever left a comment recently about asking me to film in more than 3 frames per second, which I was recording previous videos on my laptop, which is a couple of years old, and obviously the camera is not up to standard. So I'm recording on my iPhone now, out and about. So hopefully that's better. All right, now a couple of months ago, I met my friend Luke for the first time. Actually, we'd never met before. We corresponded a lot online. We had a coffee in Canary Wharf in London, and what he told me was that there was an article that I wrote called "Attacking Language Dialogues," which had a huge impact on him, more than anything else he's read or seen or heard from me. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that because I think it's a very common situation, and it's something very small, which I think experienced language learners probably do intuitively. But you know, if this is your first rodeo, so to speak, you might not have thought about this very much. Now, I think because of the amount of stuff out there, the desire we have to get through material quickly, to consume new courses and things like that, there's a temptation to look at a new dialogue in your textbook, to listen to it a couple of times, maybe read through it, and then move on to the next thing. Do the exercises, look at the word lists and things like that. But with language learning, what happens is that the more you review things, the more sticks in your head. And this concept of review is something which language teachers are usually pretty good at, actually. They kind of force you to review stuff from previous lessons. But as independent learners, we're often, we don't make the time to do it because it involves a certain amount of discipline. I think we're kind of hardwired to look for novelty and new things. But actually, we can increase the amount we learn much more by actually going back and reviewing stuff we've already done. And so I have a process of, when I'm working with language dialogues, of beginning, well, how about I tell you the process, and then I'll tell you the kind of theory bit after. So I always begin with new language dialogues by listening to the audio without any text. And the reason is that that's your opportunity to test your ear. So push your ear to understand, even in difficult circumstances. So depending on the length of the dialogue, I might listen many times through, possibly even a couple of days. And then I'll add the text later, and I'll listen to the audio whilst reading the text. Then I'll turn off the audio and spend some time studying the text. And then eventually I will hide the text and put the audio back on. So you've kind of gone full circle from listening to the audio and understanding nothing to then having studied it, gone all the way back, and then being able to listen to the audio and be able to understand it completely without any help. And not only is that a very sort of satisfying process, but it's a kind of very closed loop process where you can really tangibly see the progress that you're making. But the key thing sort of inside that, what's going on behind the scenes, is the concept of review. Now, I remember a few years back, I started to do something very simple, which was to add a 15-minute session to the end of my day. I like to study in the morning, right? It's where I'm most fresh, where I can guarantee I've got the time for learning. So what I would do for a while is just study in the morning and then go off and get on with my day and come back the next morning. But when I added a 15-minute review section at the end of my day, I found that I'd started retaining huge amounts more than I did without it. And in that review session, all I would do is kind of go back and look at what I was studying in the morning. That might be recapping some of the vocabulary, listening to the dialogue I was studying a few times, rereading passages from the dialogue, whatever it may be. But it's the act of coming back and looking again at something that you've already studied really reinforces it. The more times that your brain comes back to something, the higher likelihood it has of actually remembering it. Now, when you combine that concept of kind of multiple iterations with looking at things from different angles, so you've got the listening, you've got the reading, perhaps you read it out loud maybe, if you want to try and practice pronouncing the words in your actually out loud, maybe then even discussing it the contents of that dialogue with a teacher, all these different approaches, and coming back to it multiple times is going to have a huge impact on your brain's ability to remember the stuff that you studied. All right, so if you have a tendency to always move on to the next new thing in your language learning, then try to introduce an element of review and recap into your routine, and just watch what happens. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. All right, thanks for watching. Leave me your comments below. The dogs have come to get me, and I'll see you in the next video.